Low-income countries have a rural population of 67%. Lower middle-income countries have 59.5%. Upper middle-income countries have 33%, and higher-income countries have 18.4%, according to United Nations and World Bank. In India, it is reported that nearly 70% of the population is still living in rural areas. There is a small reverse trend gaining ground where urbanites are trying to find habitation in rural areas. But instead of improving them ecologically, they are taking their same bad design and encroaching the serene rural environments with their urban ideas. Rural development must be looked at as a very important aspect of balanced settlement of population, addressing UN Sustainability Development Goals. Digital inclusivity is key, addressing all the 7 stations of life, including environment, education, health, wealth, technology, mobility, and governance. The Indian Constitution had envisaged a strong grassroots level democracy with the Panchayat Raj system, and this must be further strengthened to community development. The United Nations World Social Report 2021, titled Reconsidering Rural Development, prescribes structural and rural transformation as fundamental to economic activity and development. That could start with the spatial considerations for the rural-urban divide. Achieving sustainable development is a challenge that is not limited by geography, demography, or even national status. Joblessness, poverty, hunger, illness, and conflict, among many, are manifestations of unmet goals that exist everywhere. But even as populations concentrate in growing cities, development challenges are particularly acute in rural communities and smaller urban settings. It follows that realizing the vision set in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development requires solutions tailored specifically for the challenges of rural communities. Suhas Ramegowda, who is our featured guest today, set upon the path of rural development as a natural progression of himself. This journey is not restricted to him but involves his entire family. Suhas and his wife Sunita have founded IndianYards for enabling women from rural and indigenous communities of the Nilgiris to generate equitable income using craft and commerce as a medium. Hi everyone, I'm very pleased to invite on this thought leadership series Suhas Ramegowda, who not only is an ex-colleague of mine at Wells Fargo, but also someone whose life and whose actions I have been admiring. I am a great fan of his. He has done some incredible things which I thought I could do in my life, but I haven't been able to. He moved completely from a corporate world, from an urban living to a rural living, works with his ecosystem there and creates livelihood, creates employment, and his work has great social outcomes. I would like to ask you about your personal transformation journey, what triggered and where you are today.
Sure. Thanks, Abu. I think for me, all of this started in 2016, rather accidental, because I was typical urbanite, living the corporate dream. But there was a deep-rooted void or a feeling that kept coming back, kept asking me the question in terms of, am I really happy doing what I'm doing? And is there a meaning to what I'm doing? Like most city folks, I also did take to the so-called extracurricular activities. Cycling is one of them. I spent a lot of time on the saddle. What it did help me is it gave me a lot of time to reflect. And I think you've done cycling as well, so apart from pedaling and with your head down, you're also getting a lot of time to think. I went through that journey, and through that journey, I realized that no, I don't want to do this anymore. And that answer became more clear. Although the answer as to what I want to do was not clear still, but it was very clear that I don't want to lead this mechanized life, materialistic life. anymore. And both me and my spouse, we took the decision that then we turned to minimalism, because we had started to see through the material belongings that we had. We started this in 2016. Around the same time, we also took to yoga. Probably that helped us more. And we switched to minimalism to the extent that I used to ride my cycle to my workplace. I was working with Shell back then. So I went through this switch or transition to minimalism while I was still in Bangalore. We sold our car, we turned to electric vehicles. Back then there was only Bajaj Electric that was making scooters. We lived this life for about a little over a year, and then we realized that our expenses was less than 10,000 rupees in a month. Well, I was earning much more. Our interaction with the city life also drastically changed. We were not having an interaction. There was no transaction between us and the city, and that's when we realized that we don't need to be here. Because we're not having any transaction. It's not helping us grow. We're not giving anything. We're not taking anything. And that's when we said that maybe it's time that we move away from the city and live the life that we wanted to, which is to live off the grid. That really was the transition from living the city life to moving to live an off the grid life. So that's really what happened. Of course, then there were a chain of events that happened once we moved out of the city to the mountains to live off the grid.
This transformation is not easy. How did you go about it? Did you snap? Did you take some amount of time? Because this also involved changing the education of your child.
It was a sort of a snap. I think we lived in the city as minimalist for a little over a year. So this period was more for us to know whether we like doing this and this is the life that we want. So it gave us confidence through the year. The education of our child is an interesting point because he never went to school. So we already had put him through an unschooling journey because we couldn't relate to our education system, the way it is. So while he was at the age of 7 itself, we had pulled him out of school. He was grade 2 then. And he was going through an unschooling journey. And I want to clarify that there is a difference between homeschooling and unschooling, because homeschooling, you're still following a curriculum which is prescribed by the education board. Unschooling is there is no curriculum. It's a child-led learning philosophy. So he was going through that already. So it really didn't mean much change for him. Of course, it meant a lot more freedom because in the city, there's only so much that you can do in terms of learning from the environment. But where we were going, he had immense opportunity. So it was a much better place for him to be. So education was not so much of a hindrance for us. But yeah, in a way it was a snap because the moment we realized that we are not having a transaction with the city, I think a movement was in 2 months. So in 2 months we wrapped up everything in the city and we just packed up, lives into 5 bags and we moved. So in a way it was, sort of a snap decision.
Can you walk your journey through your child's perspective?
Yeah.
Especially with respect to that journey of 7 to 15, in fact.
Yeah, sure. So, at the age of 7, we realized that he's, turning out to be a product of this education system, the stereotype that exists. We could see a lot of change that he was going through. The young boy that we knew before going to school and the 2 or 3 years that he went to school, there was a drastic change in terms of being extremely competitive. Even at that age. That's what scared us. And around the same time, we were having this thought that we've gone through the same system. What did it lead to? The amount of conditioning that we gathered over these years. We didn't want that life for him, and we wanted it to be something that he chooses, whatever he wants to do. So we pulled him out of school. That was the beginning. Once we pulled him out of school, again, there were a lot of questions in terms of what about his future, what career will he have, so on and so forth. But for us, what was clear is we didn't think about his career. We didn't think much about his future. What we were focused on is giving him life skills and also helping him shape his personality or character, so to say, as a person. what is he going to be, what is he going to turn out to be, rather than what career is he going to have.
Right.
That was the approach that we had towards his upbringing, or to our parenting. So for us, the focus was to give him the freedom as to what he wants to do, what he wants to learn. He turned out to be, and this could be a very different journey for every parent, because it depends on what the child wants to do. For us, Arav, our son, he always had this, what do you say, liking for learning. So he was always interested in science, he was always interested in math, he was interested in chess. So we encouraged him to follow that path, and we knew that he need to have some social interaction. So we put him in an academy where he would go to learn chess. So that was his way of socializing. Otherwise, we gave him all the material that he needed online, like Khan Academy. It's a great platform. Where he continued his interest in math and science. The third element was when we moved away from the city and we went to the mountains and the forest, he was learning from the environment that he was in. So all the life skills came into play there. While we were in the cities too, we made it a point that every weekend we would step out of the city, go for a hike, go camping, live in somebody else's farm, tent independently. It's not an organized trip, so to say, very unorganized, uncertain. Basically we were trying to get him used to uncertainty rather than certainty.
Right.
So that was our approach to parenting him. And we actually have absolutely no involvement in his learning, from an academic point of view. That was completely led by him. It was only the life skills that we pitched in for. The academic piece, he took it off on his own.
20 years ago, I can understand the distinction between rural and urban.
Yeah.
We still have a huge divide between the rural and the urban from the point of view of distribution and reach.
I think, for lack of better word, it's a gullible or naive bunch that people tend to manipulate, and that's the real rural, so they're easily, they don't actually value their vote as much, that's the reality, and it's easy for anybody to walk in to a village and get the vote of that entire village. That I think is the biggest problem. And I also, this rural-urban divide, what I have seen in my experience, there is urban, there is semi-urban, there is semi-rural, and then there is rural. So there is, between urban and rural, there are these other two segments that have propped up. Only when you go past these segments, and when I talk about semi-urban or semi-rural, this is essentially urban folks going to a rural environment and creating a small urban environment there, which is what you probably would see past Devanali.
Yeah.
All the Bangalore folks going and having their guest houses or
farmhouses,
or farmhouses.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening between urban and rural.
Right.
But when you cut across to rural, you see the real difference.
You have been working on some wonderful initiatives. Let's talk about that.
Sure.
Also try and see if we can fit in some of these buzzwords like circularity, sustainability.
Yeah.
Can we try and fit that into it?
Yeah, sure. So these words are as new to me as, I don't know, I'm sure it's not new to you, but it's very new to me. So when we moved to the mountains, we moved to real rural, which meant that we actually didn't even have civilization or other human beings in a radius of say 4 or 5 kilometers of where we lived. So it was just the three of us. We had elephants for company, we had bears for company, we were harvesting water from the mountains, we were harvesting electricity from solar, and we were living truly that off the grid life that we wanted for ourselves and growing our own food. And we've also built our house in the process using mud and stones. But when we were living here, we obviously started getting integrated into the community. The indigenous people who were living there, they were living about 4 kilometers from where we are. They had a hamlet or a village. We could see that, this livelihood issue I think when we are in the cities, at least I'll speak for myself, I knew, okay, there is a livelihood issue, in India in general. But I never spent enough time thinking about how grave an issue that is. And what is it doing to generations? It's not about one, two villages. It's been happening for generations, and the magnitude of the problem I did not, even pay attention to. Forget about understand. When we were living there, that's when it hit us in our face. We were city folks, we had the money, and we went and bought land, and we did agriculture, and we were really living a very good life. But people around us were not having a good life. They were living in the same place that we were living. They had bigger land, amount than we had, but they were not happy, and they were not living the good life that we thought we were living. That really affected us, and we could see that the earlier generation lived in a similar way. They're living the similar way. The children are also going to live the similar way because they're all going to government schools. They are going to drop out after 8th standard, and they're going to become daily wages and work in somebody else's estate or farm. So this is never going to end. Nothing's going to change. So they will continue to be stuck in that equilibrium. So that is when we said that we cannot stay here and ignore, and turn away and say that's not my problem. We had gone there with the intention of not working anymore. We didn't want to work anymore. We had retired from our so-called working life. But then we said, no, we got to do something about it. So we started with 5 women, and we saw that the women could be a good medium to bring about a change, because the men were all going out and working as daily wagers. Also, there is a huge alcohol problem, and I'm sure it is there across India. But we saw, we can only speak for what we saw in the Nilgiris. You wouldn't find a medical shop in the forest, but you will find a wine shop in the forest. It's that bad. So all the money that they were earning, it was not coming back into the household, which means the women are left to fend for themselves and for the children. So we thought we will use women as the medium and address the address the problem, because we felt that if you fix that part of the household, then you will start changing the dynamics of the household, and then in turn the community. That's how we started. We thought women are innate makers. Crafting comes naturally to them. And Sunita, who is my partner, a wife, she has had a craft experience. So we thought. Only later I came to know it's called effectual thinking. But we were just looking at what we had in terms of resources, and we started off that way in our living room. And then we continue to use craft and commerce to make that impact. But that's the work that we're doing right now. We're using craft. The craft that we use it's called macrame. It's a completely hand-art form. There's another craft called crochet. Both are very similar. We're using that to upskill women and get them to make very contemporary, very current, very relevant, useful products using sustainable material. And we use commerce, to bring the economics in, because we feel that whatever interventions you want to do, the economics needs to be, playing its part. Otherwise, it's not truly sustainable. And words like circularity and sustainability didn't exist back then. Like I said, we were trying to solve a problem, a real problem. It was only later that these words started fitting into some of the actions that we were already making without knowing that, it is circularity or it is sustainable.
Right. Innovation just doesn't happen. It's a gradual process from simplification to modernization to actually disruption.
Yeah.
And when disruption happens, that's when innovation happens.
Yes.
Your 11-year-old son was able to imagine a very different scientific world.
Yeah.
What does it take for a 11-year-old in the rural surroundings that you are to imagine something very similar? Because that shapes their future.
Absolutely. Yeah.
This is what is their aspiration. They believe, like your son might think he can be a chess grandmaster, or he might think that he can be the next Einstein, right? And that is a difficulty. If you ask any schooled, urban, well-educated, somebody scoring very high marks, what do you want to be, or what is your aspiration, I guarantee you $100 bet, you will not get an answer.
Yeah.
They will never ever say they want to be the next Einstein.
Yeah.
I'm sure your son will say that in a heartbeat.
He already says it. That's his goal. And he wants to be a research scientist.
When will that conceptual clarity come for a rural kid?
Yeah.
What needs to be done?
The answer to the question is, I think, first, this child needs to have food on the table. This child needs to have sufficient good quality clothes to wear, footwear to wear, and most importantly, should have a sense of security. That's, I think, most important. And also should be seeing his parents be happy, not continuously see them struggle and worry about what they're going to eat tomorrow or the after, or how are they going to manage the household expense. I think this child has been living in this environment for far too long that it has become second nature. And that is why this child is dropping out at grade 8, at max grade 10, and then goes back to becoming a pickup truck driver or a daily wager, and these lifestyles have other things associated to it, which is drugs, alcohol, and so on and so forth. So that's what's panning out in rural India today. So I think first the household income needs to be fixed, a sense of security, a sense of content needs to come in. Only then can this child start to experience the thinking, the freedom of thought. That's what I feel. And I feel that this is probably going to happen. If we want this to happen in the next generation, we need to act now.
Handicrafts, they are great. But can they start using nanomaterial? Can they start using machinery that does crochet at an industrial speed? Okay, can they actually create a dress in a 3D, 4D framework?
I've been asked this question a lot of times actually as to why craft, and craft is a dead end. I've heard these comments.
No, I don't
know.
Want, yeah.
I understand you're not coming from there.
Yeah.
But I want to highlight that there is a school of thought that thinks craft is a dead end. And I want to answer, sort of both of them together. I think this is the first step, where we get these women to first come out of their home and experience the joy of working, the joy of economically contributing to the household, the joy of creating something. We want them to experience this. Now, after they have been able to do this, maybe 5 years down the line, they could be creating something, special, like you said, using tools, more tools to design something much bigger, which has a much farther reach. The other aspect why craft we still think is very relevant and very important is the way it makes the woman feel. Today, again, what I spoke about the child, the women are also going through a similar process, so they're in the negative right now. Craft gives them that solace. When they're crafting, it's not just that they're making a product and they're selling. The whole process of crafting, has a positive impact on their mental and emotional health. And that's why craft is important. And I think that they could continue to do, and at some point in time graduate to doing something else, something with a far more reach. But I think today this is what they need to do.
This thing called equitable income is missing.
Yeah.
That is fundamentally necessary in order to eliminate the needs and wants.
Correct.
Can you speak about how we can collectively raise the aspirational level and also the expectation with respect to outputs, performance?
Yeah. We follow a similar philosophy or similar thinking when we train or upskill women. So the first stage of upskilling is standard for everyone, and all of them go through the same training. But during this process, we can obviously see there's A doing better than B, or B grasping better than C. So these women then get trained through the process to more complex designs. So there is a distribution or separation of work, and this is very visible and very transparent to the entire group. And that's our way of encouraging them to put in that extra effort to do something better. So there are women who go through the same training for the first 1 week, 10 days, but then progress on to different complexity of training. And that's why we've chosen a craft like crochet and macrame, where it has so much of application. You could use the same craft like crochet, for example, to make a very simple coaster that you can keep this cup on. You can use the same craft to make a shoes for a baby. You could use the same crochet to make apparel out of it, right? So the women are pushed through the process, and that's where the aspiration comes in. We've seen that majority are naturally having aspirations. They all want to do well.
Right.
It's not just that they're happy with getting 8,000 a month. No, everybody has an aspiration, if not for themselves, for their children. They always want something better. Today, if they want their child to have, say, a certain school bag, or say Bata shoes, tomorrow they want the child to get a Nike shoes. So this aspiration continues to build over time, and we've seen that happen with women even in the rural space. Our way of encouraging this aspiration and pushing them to that level is by pushing them or selecting or seeing some women who are naturally doing it and featuring them as role models or featuring them as examples by taking them through the process where they keep doing high complexity work, because of which they get paid more than the other ladies who take probably a little longer to reach that complexity. So this separation of work, this separation of skill level or complexity, and hence the separation of money that they make, sort of pushes them, to go further and get to those slots.
So you reckon that they make an equitable income today?
Absolutely. And that's a philosophy. So our philosophy is not, or our intent is not for them to make enough income that just suffices their survival. Mm-hmm. That's not what we're doing. What we're doing is to enable them to not just meet their needs, but also to be able to fulfill their wants. The aspirations that they have for themselves and for the family. That's everybody's basic right.
Enmeshed networks is one of the 7 elements of digital. And pervasive computing, which is the 6th and the 7th in that range, are essentially something that don't see a difference between rural and urban.
True.
Don't see a difference between the rich and the poor. Don't see any kind of exclusivity.
Correct.
Okay, these two bring that mutual inclusivity into place for every single living being on this planet. Yeah. In this generation, can some part be catalyzed? The most rural, the most uneducated folk, they are receptive to new ideas.
Absolutely.
Far more than actually any city bred, any
Absolutely.
urban resident.
Absolutely. I'm 100% with that, because I think they're more attuned to experimentation than anybody else, that I've seen. And like you said, out of 100, there will always be that 5% who want to take that first step. And we've seen that happen. Even with the women that we work with, there is that 5% who have gone on to take on leadership roles. Not so they don't continue to make the craft themselves, but they've moved on to roles such as teaching, mentoring, so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely possible. All I was trying to say is, the majority of them have to go through this process, mm-hmm. because they still are at a stage where they don't have a sense of security. So they have to go through the process of feeling secure first, and then moving into, progress into other things. But there is that 5% who certainly are in a good place to be able to experience this much faster than the 95%. So that's what I would say. And digital, and I would completely agree to the thinking that they're open to experimenting, and I've seen, witnessed people, women who have never stepped out of their villages, take to digital far more quicker than probably I would have, if put in a similar situation. So I don't, like you said, digital does not see distinction. That holds true.
a company like Giga, it's only seeing a human ecosystem. It creates data, so it's very important for somebody to know what their aspiration is and where they are, so that they can map a journey, a transformative journey. So we have a compass that builds that transformative journey. Do you think they would be receptive to an idea like that?
Why not? I think, like I said, it's as having an aspiration comes naturally to them.
Okay.
They may not be able to use it themselves. They may need help, and we could be that medium to help them access that information, access the platform, and for them to also understand how that relates to them.
Right.
To give them that relatability, they may need a medium, but I'm sure they would love to have that.
Suhas, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me here.
It's been a great conversation, and we look forward to continued collaboration with you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? Act 3, Scene 2, Shakespeare, Merchant of Venice. This entire divide of urban and rural is artificial and unnecessary, especially in an economy that is driven by digital. Every living being on this planet will be impacted by the digital, and we need to build a human ecosystem in order to remedy many of these errors of design. This painting that I am showing you right now is a mural art from Kerala. This uses organic paint that is produced from vegetables. And this painting uses no brushes, only fingertips. Look at this other Kavadi craft. This artifact is at least 75 years old. India is still a 75% rural country. Precious knowledge about civilization, about approach to life, medicine, arts and handicrafts is slowly diminishing because of practitioners not being available. This whole commercialization and the financial ecosystem has created this urbanization. Whether it is the future of work or the future of life, we need to be able to see this divide between rural and urban diminish. And that can diminish only when we can see a human ecosystem. Only when we can see the necessity to build human capital. That human capital that bridges the tradition, the convention with the modern and the digital. We talk about agriculture, we talk about farming, but how about equipping the rural folk who practice this with new tools, with new technologies, to enable them to lead a better quality of life, to get an equitable income? How can we stop exploiting and how can we start empowering? If there is a point in this episode that I would like you to ponder upon, it is this. We have to create systems that are empowering, but we can't create them without transforming our structures and, as a consequence of it, transforming the synergies. It is only when these structures and synergies are transformed will any system, digital or otherwise, succeed in our societies. Thank you all for watching this episode, and thanks to Suhas for sharing his personal transformation journey. In a sense, we all have to make that personal transformation. We necessarily don't have to shift from our urban surroundings. We don't have to quit our corporate jobs. We don't have to quit anything. However, we have to quit our old mindsets. The way we see things around, the way we contribute essentially to designing a better life on this planet. If you haven't subscribed so far, please do. In my next episode, I feature work culture with D. Ashok, who I had the privilege to work with at Coopers and Lybrand in my very young early days. I look forward to meeting you next week, #Tuesdays at 5. Until then, ponder upon mutual inclusivity.